Mercedes did not just cool the W17. Mercedes may have built a car that turns heat into performance. Because after Austria, the leaked innovation does not sound like normal cooling. It sounds like a hidden thermal weapon. Cold in the garage, legal. Hot on the straight, stronger. Then back under inspection, clean. And that is why this changes everything. Because every team in Formula 1 fights heat. Heat destroys tires. Heat kills reliability. Heat forces drag. Heat makes cars slower. But Mercedes may have found a way to make heat do the opposite. The FIA limit was supposed to hold the engine at 16:1 compression. But the race does not happen cold. It happens hot. And if Mercedes controlled the cooling well enough to unlock a stronger thermal state on track, then the W17 was not just surviving extreme conditions. It was using them. That means more power when rivals are weakest. More efficiency when the car is fully loaded. More control when the race gets brutal. And if this was illegal, Mercedes had a scandal. But if it was legal, the rest of the grid had something even worse. A Mercedes advantage hidden inside the one thing every rival thought was supposed to slow them down. Subscribe to the channel. At first, the leaked Mercedes innovation sounded almost too ordinary to scare anyone. Cooling. That word does not feel dangerous at first. It does not sound like a secret weapon. It does not sound like the kind of thing that can change a championship. It sounds like survival. Because every Formula 1 car has to cool itself. Every power unit creates heat. Every battery creates heat. Every brake system creates heat. Every race forces the car to live on the edge between maximum performance and self-destruction. Too much heat, and the car slows down. Too little cooling, and reliability disappears. Too much cooling, and the car carries drag it cannot afford. That is the normal battle. But the W17 may have changed the meaning of that battle. Because the leak suggests Mercedes was not simply asking, how do we get rid of heat? Mercedes may have been asking something far more dangerous. How do we use it? That is the first reason this story matters. Because in Formula 1, the best innovations are rarely the ones that look spectacular from the outside. They are the ones that change the relationship between systems. Cooling is not isolated. Cooling affects packaging. Packaging affects aerodynamics. Aerodynamics affects balance. Balance affects tires. Tires affect strategy. Strategy affects control. And control decides races. So if Mercedes found a cooling concept that did more than protect the engine, if it helped the W17 enter a stronger performance state when the car was hot, then this was never just a cooling story. It was a whole car story. That is what rivals would fear most. Not a vent. Not a duct. Not a bodywork shape. A system. A car designed so that heat, airflow, engine behavior, and race pace all work together. Because a single cooling upgrade can be copied. A visible opening can be photographed. A bodywork change can be studied. But a thermal philosophy is much harder to steal. It lives in the architecture of the car. The power unit. The materials. The combustion chamber. The side pod flow. The engine cover. The temperature targets. The way the car breathes. The way it heats. The way it holds itself at the exact moment the driver needs performance. That is why this leak changes everything after Austria. Austria is not a circuit where weaknesses stay hidden. The lap is short. The straights punish poor power delivery. The braking zones punish instability. The traction zones punish rear sliding. The repeated acceleration phases punish heat management. And because the lap comes back so quickly, every weakness repeats again and again. If a car overheats, it shows. If tires start suffering, it shows. If energy deployment becomes fragile, it shows. If cooling forces too much drag, it shows. So when a Mercedes looks efficient there, calm there, strong there, and repeatable there, the paddock does not ignore it. They ask why. And after the leak, the answer may point back to temperature. That is what makes this so powerful. Because heat is supposed to expose weakness. It is supposed to make the car more vulnerable as the race goes on. It is supposed to force compromise. Open more cooling. Carry more drag. Protect the engine. Protect the battery. Protect the brakes. Protect the tires. But Mercedes may have found a way to make the heat window part of the performance window. That is a completely different concept. A normal team sees rising temperature and thinks about risk. Mercedes may have seen rising temperature and thought about opportunity. And if that sounds extreme, that is exactly why rivals were alarmed. Because the earlier controversy around the W17 was built on a terrifying idea. The car could be legal when measured cold, but behave differently when operating hot. Cold in the garage. Hot on the straight. Static compliance. Racing performance. That split is the heart of the mystery. Because Formula 1 cars are not static machines. They transform. Wings flex under load. Tires deform under pressure. Floors change with ride height. Engines expand with temperature. The car sitting in the garage is not exactly the car attacking a flying lap. And if Mercedes understood that better than everyone else, then the cooling innovation becomes more than support. It becomes timing. The timing of when the power unit reaches its best state. The timing of when the cooling system keeps temperatures controlled but not suppressed. The timing of when the materials inside the engine behave in the way Mercedes wants. The timing of when the car becomes strongest. That is the hidden art. Not just cooling the car down. Controlling the temperature precisely enough to make the car perform at the right moment. That is where Brixworth becomes central. Because a power unit advantage is not only about peak horsepower. It is about where that horsepower appears. How repeatable it is. How reliable it is. How much cooling it needs. How much drag the chassis must accept to support it. And how well it connects with the electrical side of the new regulations. If Mercedes can keep the power unit in a more efficient thermal state, then the benefit spreads. The internal combustion engine can operate closer to its strongest condition. The hybrid deployment can be managed with more confidence. The bodywork can remain tighter. The aerodynamic penalty can be reduced. The driver gets a car that feels faster without looking obviously compromised. That is what makes a hidden cooling system so dangerous. It does not have to create one dramatic gain. It can create small gains everywhere. A little more power down the straight. A little less drag from tighter packaging. A little more stable rear because the aeroflow is cleaner. A little better tire life because the car is not sliding as much. A little more strategy freedom because the pace survives longer. Each piece alone might look explainable. Together, they look like dominance. That is why Red Bull would not be satisfied with a simple explanation. They would not hear the word cooling and move on. They would ask what the cooling enabled. Did it let Mercedes run the engine hotter in a controlled way? Did it let them keep the car tighter aerodynamically? Did it allow a thermal expansion effect to appear only at race temperature? Did it make the W17 stronger as the car reached its operating window? Did it help Russell maintain pace when others were managing heat? Those questions are the real story. Because if the answer is yes, then Mercedes did not just leak an innovation. They leaked a philosophy. A way of building a car around the condition every rival was trying to escape. Heat. And heat touches everything. It touches the engine. It touches the battery. It touches the brakes. It touches the tires. It touches the bodywork. It touches the race pace. It touches how brave a driver can be when the car is under pressure. A driver with a thermally stable car can attack longer. He can trust the rear more. He can defend without overheating the tires as quickly. He can push when another driver is being told to manage. That is how a hidden cooling innovation becomes a race weapon. It changes the driver's freedom. And freedom in Formula One is priceless. Because a driver who has to manage temperature is always slightly restrained. Lift here. Protect there. Back off. Open the gap. Cool the brakes. Save the tires. Watch the battery. But a driver in a car with better thermal control can keep pressure alive. He can force rivals to respond. He can stay in the fight while others are being asked to protect the machine. That may be what made Mercedes so frightening. Not just speed. Freedom to use the speed. And that is exactly why Austria matters. Because Austria forces repetition. Repeated braking. Repeated acceleration. Repeated energy demand. Repeated heat buildup. If the W17 can keep performing there, the cooling story becomes more believable. Not proven by itself, but believable enough to make rivals nervous. Because a thermally strong car at Austria is not just surviving. It is showing that the performance can hold under stress. And stress reveals truth. That is what every engineer knows. You do not understand a car when everything is easy. You understand it when temperatures rise, tires age, fuel burns, and the driver keeps pushing. That is when weak concepts begin to crack. And if the Mercedes did not crack, the paddock had to ask why. The leaked cooling innovation gives that question a direction. Maybe the W17 was not simply faster because of one engine number. Maybe it was faster because Mercedes controlled the environment that allowed the engine, aero, and tires to work together. That is much deeper. Because a raw power advantage can be reduced by rules. A visible aerodynamic advantage can be copied. But a thermal ecosystem is harder to attack. You cannot copy it without understanding the whole chain. Where the heat is generated. Where it is moved. Where it is retained. Where it is rejected. How the materials respond. How the engine behaves as temperature rises. How the cooling exits affect airflow. How the tires react to the balance created by the package. That is why this is the kind of leak that can change a season. It does not simply reveal a part. It reveals where everyone else may have been looking in the wrong direction. Rivals may have looked at straight-line speed. They may have looked at combustion. They may have looked at energy deployment. They may have looked at wings, floors, and drag levels. But the real secret may have been the condition underneath all of it: temperature control. And once you understand that, the W17 looks different. The cooling system is not just keeping the car alive. It may be helping decide when the car becomes most powerful. The bodywork is not just packaging. It may be managing the thermal path that supports the entire performance state. The heat is not just waste. It may be part of the trigger. That is why the phrase hidden innovation matters. Hidden does not always mean illegal. Hidden can mean invisible to the eye. Hidden can mean embedded so deeply in the car's concept that rivals cannot simply identify it from photos. Hidden can mean the advantage only appears in the data. And data is where Formula One tells the truth. Not the paint. Not the launch pictures. Not the public explanations. The traces. Speed. Energy. Temperature. Degradation. Throttle. Braking. Recovery. Deployment. That is where Mercedes rivals would search. And if the traces show the car staying strong as heat builds, the leak becomes more than a rumor. It becomes a clue. A clue that Mercedes found a way to make the W17 more resilient in the moments where others weaken. That is the scariest kind of performance. A car that is fast when conditions are perfect is dangerous. A car that stays fast when conditions become brutal is championship material. Because races are rarely won in perfect comfort. They are won when tires are fading, brakes are hot, batteries are being managed, and drivers are trying to force mistakes. If Mercedes can keep the car in the right window during that phase, then the advantage is not just technical. It is psychological. Rivals feel it. They see the Mercedes not fading. They hear their own engineers telling them to manage. They watch Russell stay close. They realize the car behind or ahead still has performance left. That creates pressure. And pressure creates mistakes. A defensive stop too early. A push phase too aggressive. A tire set destroyed too quickly. A strategy call made because the Mercedes will not go away. That is how cooling becomes control. Not by appearing in the headline. By shaping the choices everyone else has to make. That is the hidden power of the W17 story. It turns the most invisible part of the car into the center of the race. And after Austria, that matters even more because every team now has to ask whether Mercedes' strength was really where they thought it was. Was it pure horsepower? Was it aerodynamics? Was it tire life? Was it energy deployment? Or was it the thermal system that allowed all of those things to work at once? That is the question that opens the next door. Because if Mercedes has a cooling innovation that supports a hidden thermal performance state, then the FIA's previous focus on hot and cold conditions becomes even more important. The rulebook cannot only care what the car is when measured cold. It has to care what the car becomes at racing temperature. And that means the leak may not just affect Mercedes. It may change how every team is inspected. Because once the sport accepts that temperature can be weaponized, every test condition becomes a battlefield. Cold, hot, static, dynamic, loaded, unloaded. The rules have to follow the car into the state where the performance actually exists. That is the bigger implication. Mercedes may have forced Formula One to rethink what legality means in a heat-dependent machine. Because a Formula One car is always changing. And the team that controls those changes best wins. That may be the real Mercedes advantage. Not one cooling duct. Not one hidden passage. Not one isolated trick. The ability to control transformation. Cold to hot. Garage to race. Compliance to performance. Potential to power. That is why this first block cannot close the mystery too early. Because the leaked cooling innovation is only the first clue. The real answer is deeper. It sits in how cooling connects to the engine's alleged thermal behavior. How that connects to straight-line speed. How that connects to tire life. How that connects to race control. And how that connects to the FIA suddenly needing to care much more about operating conditions. That chain is what changes everything. Mercedes may not have built the W17 around fighting heat. They may have built it around commanding heat. And if that is true, then after Austria, every rival is no longer asking how Mercedes cooled the car. They are asking something far more dangerous. How much performance did that cooling secretly unlock?